In the scorching, humid summer of 1907, deep in the dense, malaria-infested jungles of the Isthmus of Panama, a 9-mile stretch of mountain terrain, known as the Culebra Cut, was earning a dark, terrifying title, Hell's Gorge. The earth here was not solid granite or predictable stone. It was a treacherous, unstable cocktail of volcanic ash, soft clay, saturated mud, and razor-sharp basalt. The air hovered at 95 degrees Fahrenheit with 90% humidity. It smelled of sulfur, black blasting powder, rotting jungle foliage, and standing water thick with mosquito larvae. Every day, 9,000 men descended into a giant, man-made canyon that reached hundreds of feet deep into the Continental Divide. Above them sat steam-powered Bucerus shovels, roaring and belching black coal smoke. But down on the unstable canyon floor, in knee-deep, boiling mud, stood the real backbone of the operation. Thousands of black laborers from Barbados, Jamaica, and Martinique. They wore sweat-soaked cotton shirts, heavy canvas trousers, and battered leather boots. They held iron crowbars, sledgehammers, hand shovels, and dynamite loading poles. Their job was a daily battle against a mountain range that was literally fighting back. Without warning, the sheer earth walls of the Culebra Cut would crack with a sound like a cannon shot. Millions of tons of liquid mud and shattered rock would slide down the canyon walls at 30 miles an hour, burying steam shovels, crushing iron railroad tracks like straw, and swallowing whole crews of workers alive in seconds. The French had tried to dig this same cut 20 years earlier under Ferdinand de Lesseps, the celebrated builder of the Suez Canal. The jungle defeated them, leaving behind 20,000 dead workers, bankrupt investors, and billions of francs in ruined machinery rusting in the mud. When the United States took over the project in 1904, critics in Washington called it an impossible engineering death trap. Yet, over the next 10 years, 40,000 men dug over 96 million cubic yards of earth out of that 9-mile mountain trench, enough material to build a wall of earth 8 feet high around the entire equator of the earth. They did it under the threat of lethal yellow fever, deadly landslides, exploding dynamite, and tropical heat that melted the soles of their boots. This is the story of how human sweat, iron hand tools, and unyielding human muscle conquered the Culebra Cut and opened the Panama Canal to the world. Welcome to the bare hands. To understand why the Culebra Cut was the most dangerous earth-moving operation in human history, you have to look at the geometry of the Isthmus of Panama. Panama is a narrow strip of land connecting North and South America, bridging the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. On paper, it was the ideal location for an interoceanic canal. A ship sailing from New York to San Francisco could cut nearly 8,000 miles off its journey by cutting through Panama instead of navigating the treacherous, icy waters of Cape Horn at the tip of South America. But nature had placed a massive 9-mile wall directly across the middle of the isthmus, the Continental Divide. To build a sea-level or lock-based canal, engineers had no choice. They had to slice a deep, 9-mile trench straight through the highest ridge of the mountain range, at a point called Culebra, the Spanish word for snake. When Ferdinand de Lesseps arrived in Panama in 1881, fresh off his victory constructing the Suez Canal in Egypt, he assumed Panama would be just as easy. Suez was flat, dry desert sand that could be scooped out easily. Panama was a nightmare. It was a dense, impenetrable tropical rainforest, rained on by up to 150 inches of water every year during an 8-month wet season. The Chagres River, which ran parallel to the canal route, could rise 30 feet in a single night during a tropical storm. turning dry construction beds into raging inland seas. Worst of all were the invisible killers, yellow fever and malaria. In the 1880s, medical science did not understand how yellow fever was transmitted. Doctors believed it was caused by bad night air, swamp miasma, or filthy clothing. In reality, the jungle was home to billions of Aedes aegypti mosquitoes that bred in standing water and transmitted the deadly virus directly into the human bloodstream. Within weeks of arriving in Panama, French engineers and laborers began dying by the hundreds. A healthy man would wake up with a mild fever and severe back pain. By noon, his skin and eyes would turn a deep yellow as his liver failed. By nightfall, he was vomiting black blood, a symptom known as vomito negro. Within 48 hours, his kidneys shut down, and he died in agony. Over 20,000 French workers perished in the 1880s. The French company collapsed in total financial ruin in 1889, abandoning millions of dollars worth of locomotives, steam dredges, and tools to be swallowed by the jungle vines. The Culebra Cut remained standing, victorious, untouched, and deadly. In 1904, President Theodore Roosevelt acquired the Panama Canal zone for $40 million, declaring that the United States would finish what the French had failed to do. Roosevelt appointed a brilliant, iron-willed railway engineer named John Frank Stevens as chief engineer. When Stevens arrived in Panama in July 1905, he found a scene of total chaos. Thousands of unemployed laborers were living in squalid shanties, equipment was broken, and yellow fever was causing panic among the workforce. Stevens made a legendary decision. He stopped all digging in the Culebra Cut for an entire year. "We will not move another shovel of dirt," Stevens declared, "until we have built a place for human beings to live." Stevens brought in Dr. William Crawford Gorge, an army physician who championed a revolutionary new theory. Yellow fever was not caused by bad air, but exclusively by mosquitoes. Gorge launched one of the most aggressive public health campaigns in human history. An army of sanitation workers sprayed 3 million gallons of heavy oil over every pond, puddle, ditch, and rain barrel on the isthmus to kill mosquito larvae. They screened every window, built clean wooden barracks, installed pure water systems, and fumigated every building in Panama City and Colon with sulfur. By late 1905, yellow fever was completely eradicated from the canal zone. The invisible killer was gone. Now, John Stevens turned his attention back to the physical monster waiting in the jungle, the Culebra Cut. The scale of the excavation required at Culebra defied human imagination. The cut had to be widened to several hundred feet and deepened by over 100 feet through 9 miles of mountainous terrain. While heavy steam shovels were brought in to do the mass digging, the entire logistics system depended on thousands of manual laborers who laid iron rails, set explosive charges, cleared rock falls, and maintained the machinery in the muddy abyss. To do this brutal labor, the Isthmian Canal Commission recruited over 30,000 black workers from the British West Indies, primarily from the islands of Barbados and Jamaica. They were known as the Silver Men. The workforce was strictly segregated into a racial caste system. White American managers, engineers, and skilled tradesmen were paid in gold coin and received luxury housing, paid vacation, and gourmet food. Black Caribbean laborers were paid in Panamanian silver pesos, earning roughly 10 cents an hour for 10-hour shifts, and lived in cramped wooden barracks or tents in the mud. Despite the low pay and harsh discrimination, the Silver Men became the undisputed muscle that dug the Panama Canal. I pulled an entry from the labor shipping manifests kept at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. His name was Granville Seeley. Seeley was 22 years old, born in St. Philip Parish, Barbados. In February 1907, facing severe poverty at home, he paid $3 for passage on a steamship to Colon and signed a contract with the Canal Commission. When Seeley arrived at the Culebra Cut, he was assigned to a track-shifting crew. The track-shifting crews had one of the most exhausting, back-breaking jobs in the entire canyon. As the steam shovels dug deeper into the rock face, the iron train tracks that carried the dirt trains had to be constantly moved sideways toward the new excavation edge. In the morning, Granville Seeley and a crew of 90 men stood along a 300-foot section of iron track, embedded in heavy, sticky blue mud. They were armed with 6-foot iron lining bars. On the count of the foreman's chant, 90 men shoved their iron bars beneath the rails at the exact same instant, heaving with every muscle in their bodies to pry the heavy iron track sideways, 6 inches through the mud. They did this inch by agonizing inch, hour after hour, under a blazing tropical sun that drove ground temperatures up to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The blue clay in the Culebra Cut acted like suction cups on the wooden ties. If a man lost his grip or his iron bar slipped on wet clay, the tension on the rails would snap the bar back like a catapult, shattering his jaw, ribs, or arms. Granville Seeley worked 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, shifting thousands of feet of track through boiling mud. He earned 90 cents a day in silver coin, sending half of it back to his mother in Barbados. He was just one of 30,000 West Indian men who poured their youth, health, and blood into the mud of Culebra. Take a single moment to hit that subscribe button right now. This channel exists to ensure that the memory of men like Granville Seeley and the unsung laborers who built the modern world with their bare hands are never forgotten. One click keeps these historical deep dives alive. By 1908, under new Chief Engineer Lieutenant Colonel George Washington Goethals, the Culebra Cut became a roaring, synchronized industrial factory of human sweat and dynamite. Every single day, 600 carloads of dynamite were hauled into the cut. Because the rock was too tough for steam shovels to scoop directly, specialized teams of drillers walked ahead of the heavy machinery. They operated tripod-mounted rock drills driven by compressed air, supplied through miles of iron piping, connected to air compressor plants along the canal line. The drills hammered into the basalt and volcanic ash with a deafening metallic screech that echoed off the canyon walls. Once the holes were drilled 30 feet deep into the rock face, the powder crews moved in. The powder men were almost exclusively black West Indian workers who volunteered for the highest-paid, most lethal job in the canyon. They carried 40-pound wooden crates of dynamite slung over their bare shoulders, stepping over slick iron rails and hot steam pipes. Using long wooden ramrods, they packed dozens of sticks of dynamite into each hole, wired the electric detonators together, and connected them to master firing switches. Over 6 million pounds of dynamite were detonated in the Culebra Cut every single year. The danger was constant and terrifying. In the intense tropical heat, premature detonations were a frequent nightmare. Sunlight reflecting off brass equipment or a stray spark from a passing steam locomotive could ignite a charge while men were still packing it into the hole. On December 12, 1908, at a section of the cut near Bas Obispo, a crew of 50 men was packing 22 tons of dynamite into 53 deep drill holes. Without warning, a pocket of acidic groundwater seeped into one of the charge holes, reacting with a damaged detonator cap. At 11:10 in the morning, 22 tons of dynamite exploded simultaneously in a single, catastrophic blast. The explosion blew out the entire side of the hill, sending thousands of tons of sharp rock, iron drill rigs, and heavy timber flying hundreds of feet into the air. 26 men were killed instantly, their bodies torn to pieces by the shockwave. Over 50 others were severely burned, blinded, or dismembered by flying stone. Rescue crews worked for hours digging through the smoking rubble with hand shovels to recover the dead. Yet, despite the horror at Bas Obispo, the work did not stop for a single day. An hour after the bodies were carried out of the canyon on flat cars, new powder crews stepped forward, picked up their wooden ramrods, and began packing dynamite into the next rock face. As dangerous as dynamite was, the greatest, most terrifying enemy in the Culebra Cut was the earth itself. The geologists, who advised the American engineers, had made a disastrous mistake. They assumed the rock walls of the mountain cut were solid and stable, capable of standing at steep, near-vertical angles. They were catastrophically wrong. The mountains of Panama were composed of layered, chaotic geological strata, soft clays, slick mud, saturated volcanic ash, and heavy basalt capstone. When the workers dug out the bottom of the canyon to create the canal bed, they removed the structural weight holding up the mountain walls. Under the immense pressure of the mountain peaks, the floor of the cut began to bulge upward, while the massive earth walls above cracked, loosened, and collapsed downward. They were called landslides. The slides occurred without warning, day or night. A worker standing on the canyon floor would suddenly hear a deep, terrifying groaning sound emanating from deep inside the mountain wall. The iron rails beneath his boots would begin to twist and buckle like wire. A second later, millions of tons of mud, trees, boulders, and earth would detach from the canyon wall and avalanche downward into the working cut. The speed and power of the landslides were staggering. A major slide at Cucaracha in 1907 dumped over 500,000 cubic yards of earth into the canal bed in less than 30 minutes, completely filling the trench the workers had spent 2 years digging. Massive 40-ton Bucyrus steam shovels were picked up like toys, tossed upside down, and buried under 40 feet of mud. Iron locomotives were overturned, water pipes were snapped, and dozens of workers were buried alive before they could run to safety. The psychological toll on the workers was brutal. Men would spend 6 months digging a 3-mile section of the canyon down to its final design depth. They would go to sleep in their wooden barracks on a rainy Tuesday night and wake up on Wednesday morning to find that a slide had dumped 2 million cubic yards of mud back into the cut, completely erasing 6 months of agonizing labor overnight. Many white American engineers broke down under the stress, resigned their positions, and caught the first steamship back to New York. Chief Engineer George Washington Goethals refused to give up. When a terrified young engineer ran into Goethals' office reporting that a massive new slide at Culebra had buried 3 steam shovels and reset the excavation work by 6 months, Goethals looked up calmly from his desk and delivered his famous, unyielding order. There is only one way to handle a landslide. Dig it out. And that is precisely what the Silver Men did. Day after day, month after month, year after year, the West Indian laborers stepped back down into the muddy abyss. When the heavy steam shovels were buried in mud, human beings went in with iron hand shovels and pickaxes to clear the mud off the iron booms. They attached heavy steel cables to the buried machinery, used hand winches to haul the multi-ton iron beasts upright, repaired the boilers in mobile field shops, and started digging all over again. To control the water feeding the slides, crews constructed massive wooden drainage ditches along the upper ridges of the mountain. They used high-pressure water hoses, a process known as hydraulic mining, to wash away millions of cubic yards of unstable topsoil from the upper peaks before it could slide into the working cut. It was a war of attrition between human determination and the geology of a continent. Between 1904 and 1914, the total amount of material removed from the Culebra Cut reached over 96 million cubic yards. More than 22 million cubic yards of that total was material brought down by unexpected landslides, dirt that had to be dug out 2, 3, or 4 times over. By the spring of 1913, after 9 years of unbroken excavation, the Culebra Cut was finally reaching its target depth. The towering rock walls of Cucaracha and Gold Hill had been cut back into wide, step-like terraces to prevent future slides. A massive 9-mile trench, 300 feet wide at the bottom and hundreds of feet deep, now sliced completely through the Continental Divide. On October 10, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson sat at his desk in the White House and pressed a black telegraph button. The electrical signal traveled 3,000 miles down the East Coast, through underwater ocean cables, directly to a master dynamite charge set at the Gamboa Dike, a temporary earthen dam holding back the waters of the Chagres River. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the Gamboa Dike exploded in a massive geyser of water and earth. A roaring torrent of green river water rushed into the dry canyon, filling the 9-mile trench of the Culebra Cut for the very first time. Within hours, the wild, chaotic mountain gorge that had claimed thousands of lives became a calm, navigable waterway. On August 15, 1914, the steamship SS Ancon officially made the historic first transit through the completed Panama Canal. As the ship glided smoothly through the calm waters of the Culebra Cut, brass bands played on the deck, and dignitaries in white linen suits toasted the triumph. The journey between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans had been reduced from 14,000 miles around Cape Horn to just 50 miles through the Isthmus of Panama. It was celebrated as the greatest engineering achievement in the history of mankind. The official records state that 5,609 workers died during the American construction between 1904 and 1914. Combined with the 20,000 who died during the French attempt, the total human cost exceeds 25,000 lives. Over 4/5 of those who died during the American era were black West Indian laborers, men whose names were recorded on silver payroll vouchers and largely forgotten by history. They received no pensions. They received no medals. When the canal was completed in 1914, thousands of West Indian workers were simply handed a one-way steamship ticket back to Barbados or Jamaica, their health ruined by years of heavy labor. Others remained in Panama, building vibrant Afro-Caribbean communities that helped shape the culture of modern Panama. Today, more than a century later, massive modern container ships glide quietly through that same 9-mile stretch of the Culebra Cut every single day. The high rock walls of Gold Hill and Contractors Hill still tower over the water. If you stand on the deck of a ship passing through the cut today, you do not see the roaring steam engines. You do not hear the deafening metallic screech of drills. The jungle has reclaimed the upper terraces. Green vines and tropical ferns cover the scars where millions of tons of earth once collapsed. But beneath the quiet water lies the work of 40,000 men who stood knee-deep in boiling mud, held iron tools in their hands, and refused to let a mountain range stop the movement of the world. The Panama Canal was not built by blueprints alone. It was built by the bare hands. Thank you for watching this chapter of forgotten history. I want to leave you with one final question to consider. Today, we rely on advanced satellite mapping and automated machinery to modify the Earth's landscape. Yet a century ago, thousands of immigrant workers conquered an unstable mountain range using iron tools and raw physical muscle. Have we lost that level of human resilience? Or have we simply learned to value human life more than our industrial ambitions? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you believe these forgotten stories of human labor deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button, share this video, and I will see you in the next deep dive. Until next time, take care.